Hey besties, welcome back to the channel. Over the weekend, several new documents surfaced online regarding the ongoing legal developments involving Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and their respective production partners. The updates include a newly surfaced declaration from a previously unnamed source, along with transcripts of testimony from 3 individuals, Vivian Baker, Danny Greenberg, and Warren Zabala, all connected to the ongoing discussions surrounding the 47.1 sanctions motion. According to filings, the testimonies were part of a response submitted by Wayfarer Studios. They detail filming activities that primarily took place in New Jersey and outline the studio's position on how certain behind-the-scenes negotiations were viewed, specifically as aggressive or unorthodox business tactics rather than standard bargaining. The declaration at the center of this update comes from Claire Aub, writer and director of the independent film Empire Waste, produced by Wayfarer Studios and released in limited theaters in late 2024. Her statement describes her own professional experiences during production and references her interactions with studio representatives. However, legal experts suggest this declaration may hold limited relevance in the ongoing case, since much of its content relates to separate projects and not directly to "it ends with us." Under courtroom standards, this kind of evidence, often referred to as propensity evidence, is typically excluded if it doesn't directly pertain to the current dispute. According to public information, Empire Waste was a small-scale indie film that ran briefly in select theaters, fewer than 100 nationwide, before transitioning to streaming platforms. It's not uncommon for smaller titles with limited box office performance to have short theatrical runs. In her declaration, Aub described professional tensions and her request that a particular producer not be present during portions of filming. She also mentioned a follow-up conversation with Wayfarer's co-founder Steve Sarowitz, which she recorded. That recording, she says, was provided to Blake Lively's legal team voluntarily. However, because both Connecticut and Illinois are two-party consent states, questions have arisen about whether the recording was legally obtained. Sarowitz, through his attorney, has stated that he did not give permission for the recording. This issue could determine whether the audio is admissible as evidence in court. What's especially notable is how this recording ended up being provided to Lively's team, not via subpoena, but voluntarily. That detail has led observers to wonder about the timeline and context behind the exchange. Some legal commentators suggest that if the conversation was meant to support claims of broader misconduct, it may not carry significant evidentiary weight. From a procedural standpoint, the material appears aimed at supporting Lively's broader claim of being targeted or undermined during professional negotiations. Whether this evidence actually advances that argument remains uncertain. The situation also raises broader industry questions, not about any single individual, but about how personal experiences, professional relationships, and contractual conflicts can intersect within Hollywood's close-knit creative circles. Ultimately, while the declaration adds another layer of intrigue to the case, it doesn't appear to introduce new verified evidence that would dramatically alter the legal standing. Instead, it underscores the complexity of Hollywood's legal disputes, where creative control, personal trust, and legal obligations often collide in unpredictable ways. So that's who the Declarant is. Just to be clear, there's no reason for anyone to target her online. Please don't leave negative comments or messages. I only know what's been made public through her written statement, and while I do think the timing raises questions, the larger issue seems to be around recording someone without consent. If that happened and it violated state law, that's something the courts will address, not the public. Now, moving on to the deposition transcripts, the most notable one appears to be from Danny Greenberg, who worked as an agent for Justin Baldoni. His testimony provides some insight into what was happening during production. There's also testimony from Vivian Baker, Blake Lively's makeup artist. Her statements mainly confirm that she was present during the filming in New Jersey and that she didn't personally witness any inappropriate behavior on set. Based on that, it seems Wayfarer Studios may argue that any earlier issues were resolved after November and that the remaining conflicts were primarily due to creative disagreements, not misconduct claims. From Lively's side, the argument appears to be that after she raised certain workplace concerns, a smear campaign followed. Wayfarer's defense, however, seems positioned to frame the situation as professional conflict rather than retaliation, possibly questioning whether her claims were made in good faith or with some degree of personal or creative frustration involved. Now, the portion of the transcript that's drawn the most attention is Greenberg's exchange with attorneys reviewing text messages between him and Baldoni. In one text, Greenberg expresses support, saying something along the lines of, "I'm here to have your back. You're going to crush this." Another exchange referenced in the transcript involves correspondence with Sony, where Greenberg was reportedly helping Baldoni draft a message about the film's development issues. When asked if he had discussed Blake Lively's alleged behavior with anyone at Sony, Greenberg said he had an ongoing conversation with Angie Giannetti, a Sony executive overseeing the project. At that point in time, their main concern, he said, was the film's premiere logistics, not any personal accusations. As the deposition continues, the discussion shifts toward internal communications within the production team, messages, call, notes, and email drafts that, according to court filings, were exchanged between several key figures connected to the film. The questioning becomes more detailed here. Attorneys go line by line through text exchanges, examining how both sides interpreted the events leading up to the disputes. One of the central threads is about how much involvement each party had in the decision-making process, particularly when it came to post-production edits, marketing control, and the film's premiere strategy. From what Greenberg describes, there were clear tensions between creative vision and executive oversight. He doesn't directly accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but his wording implies that there were communication breakdowns between the production company, the studio, and Blake Lively's team. Those breakdowns appear to have escalated into mistrust, which eventually shaped how both sides viewed the conflict. At this point, the legal representatives introduce references to earlier exchanges between Baldoni, Sony executives, and producers about how to move forward amid what was described as difficult circumstances. The implication from the transcript is that while emotions were high and disagreements were frequent, the production team believed they were still trying to keep the project on track. Meanwhile, according to the filings, Lively's team interprets the same period differently, suggesting that the atmosphere on set changed significantly after she raised her concerns. The court records show that she viewed subsequent decisions, such as changes in promotion strategy and internal communications, as part of a broader pattern of retaliation or reputational harm. Greenberg's testimony doesn't go as far as confirming that interpretation. Instead, he maintains that his focus was primarily professional, helping navigate the situation from a business standpoint while trying to maintain morale within the team. His statements suggest a mix of loyalty, confusion, and caution. A sense that he was aware of tensions but unsure how deep the underlying conflict truly was. By this stage, the attorneys begin connecting the communications timeline to broader issues in the case, including questions about intent, perception, and responsibility. They explore whether the disagreement stemmed from personal animosity, creative control disputes, or simply the challenges of managing a high-stakes film under public scrutiny. Each side, according to the transcript, continues to hold a distinctly different view of what actually happened and why. For observers and analysts, that difference in perception, rather than any single event, has become one of the most defining aspects of this ongoing courtroom story. So threatening to not go to the premiere if Justin was there, making repeated warnings and escalating those threats in a cumulative way, that's where the conflict started intensifying. During the deposition, when Danny Greenberg was asked about these interactions, you could feel how carefully he chose his words. The opposing counsel pointed it out directly, saying, "You're choosing your words very carefully, aren't you?" And he admitted he was doing his best to be precise. It's clear that every word mattered in these transcripts, especially when the term extortion entered the discussion. That single word set the tone for how the defense might frame Blake Lively's conduct behind the scenes. When Greenberg was pressed about using the word extortion, he didn't deny it. He confirmed it was in the text exchange he had with Justin Baldoni and said it felt appropriate at the time. That statement alone suggests that from his point of view, Blake's behavior went beyond normal creative disagreements. The lawyer, Ms. Garup, immediately jumped on that point and asked if this wasn't just a simple clash of personalities. Greenberg explained that his reference to extortion reflected what he saw as cumulative pressure on the studio, on Wayfarer, and on Justin, that her actions felt like attempts to gain control through manipulation or threats rather than professional negotiation. The tone of that exchange highlights just how serious the behind-the-scenes tension was. These weren't minor disputes about scheduling or editing. They were deeper issues about authority, reputation, and narrative control. When Garup asked if this was more than just two people not getting along, Greenberg tried to maintain a diplomatic line, but the implication was already clear. The behavior he described didn't sound like a creative disagreement. It sounded like deliberate pressure meant to force outcomes. That's why this transcript is so significant. It paints a very different picture from the one Blake and her legal team have been promoting publicly. Instead of being the victim of mistreatment on set, she's described by insiders as the one making demands and using threats to get her way. Greenberg even says that the studio and agents were having to manage her behavior, not the other way around. When you look at this alongside other testimonies, the pattern becomes clearer. Warren Zavala, another agent from WME, confirmed that the complaints he heard from Blake weren't about harassment at all. They were about her anger over not being included in the testing phase of the film's post-production. According to him, Baldoni and Wayfarer had every right to test the movie because it was their property and their creative responsibility. Blake, however, felt excluded, and that exclusion seems to have triggered much of the hostility that followed. Zavala said directly that the issues brought to him by Blake were not about sexual harassment, but about the testing of the cut of the film. He added that she seemed upset about collaboration in the final stages of post, which is a professional dispute, not a legal one. That distinction matters a lot because Blake's lawsuit and her public narrative have leaned heavily on claims of harassment and retaliation. But if the evidence shows her main conflict was creative control, it changes the entire foundation of her case. Put simply, Wayfarer's argument is that Blake weaponized serious allegations to gain power over the project. And if Greenberg's use of the word extortion is accurate, that's exactly how they'll frame it in court, that she used threats and legal pressure to seize control of a film she wasn't contractually entitled to edit or manage. The transcripts also show how the conflict spilled over into the personal and professional relationships surrounding the film. Ryan Reynolds reportedly called Danny Greenberg, labeling Baldoni a sexual predator, which reignited the controversy and pulled Sony deeper into the drama. Greenberg testified that this call came at a time when tensions had already cooled, making Ryan's intervention even more disruptive. It's worth noting that Ryan's past comments about competition with his own children and his often intense humor don't exactly help his credibility here. The more we look at this, the more it seems like the conflict between Blake and Justin was less about safety or mistreatment and more about creative control and influence. The references in the testimony to threats, escalation, and extortion support Wayfarers claim that Blake's lawsuit wasn't motivated purely by justice but by a desire to control the narrative and the final cut of the movie. Now, this doesn't mean every word from the defense is gospel truth. This is still one side of the story. But the evidence revealed so far raises serious questions about Blake's motivations and the credibility of her accusations. Greenberg, who had previously represented Baldoni, was clearly sympathetic to him in this deposition. That alone is interesting because he's still with, WME, the same agency that represents Blake. So why would an agent under the same corporate umbrella defend Baldoni so openly unless he genuinely believed Blake's actions were out of line? If Greenberg truly viewed Blake's conduct as manipulative, it would explain why he eventually cut ties with Baldoni, but still acknowledged his side of the story under oath. That kind of testimony carries weight. It shows that even within Blake's professional circle, there were doubts about her behavior and her motives. Meanwhile, Warren Zavala's testimony adds another layer. He described visiting the set multiple times and said Blake's complaints weren't about any inappropriate conduct. Instead, they were about post-production, specifically her frustration with how much control she had over the editing and testing of the film. He also implied that she may not have fully understood her contractual rights, since she wasn't the editor and didn't have final cut authority. That's a key point because much of Blake's frustration appears to stem from expectations that she didn't have the contractual right to enforce. If she wasn't entitled to make those decisions, but still tried to force them through legal or personal pressure, Wayfarer's argument about malice and bad faith becomes much stronger. Wayfarer's legal team is essentially arguing that her claims of harassment were a strategic move, a way to pressure the studio and the director into giving her what she wanted creatively. They're framing this not as a case of justice, but as a calculated misuse of legal and public platforms. And that's why Greenberg's language in those texts is so critical. The word extortion isn't something you toss around lightly in Hollywood. It carries serious implications. If a senior agent at a top firm believed her actions looked like extortion, it reinforces the defense's narrative that Blake wasn't acting in good faith. That single perception, that she was leveraging serious accusations to force creative changes, could dismantle her entire lawsuit. But beyond the legal implications, there's a moral and professional one too. Hollywood is full of power struggles, but the line between advocacy and manipulation is thin. If an actor starts using legal pressure as a tool for creative control, it sets a dangerous precedent. It blurs the boundary between legitimate claims and career tactics. The testimonies suggest that by late 2024, the atmosphere on set was toxic, not because of any misconduct by Baldoni, but because of the mounting distrust between Blake and the rest of the production team. The communications reveal that the studio, the agents, and the director were all trying to contain the fallout. They describe her behavior as escalating, her threats as strategic, and her demands as unreasonable. There's another detail worth noting: the so-called 17-point agreement Blake reportedly leaned on during her disputes. This agreement, which she used to justify some of her actions, seems to have been interpreted differently by the parties involved. While she believed it granted her creative authority, the others viewed it as an overreach. And when she didn't get her way, the tensions exploded. If we connect this back to earlier events, it paints a consistent pattern. Each time Blake faced professional pushback, whether from production schedules, marketing decisions, or creative choices, she escalated the conflict. Greenberg's testimony shows she used threats and ultimatums, while Zavala's suggests she tried to leverage those threats into greater control. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean Blake's experiences weren't difficult or that her feelings weren't valid. Creative collaboration often becomes messy, especially on high-stakes projects. But the evidence emerging from these transcripts makes it hard to see her purely as the victim she's portrayed publicly. Instead, it suggests someone determined to maintain control at any cost, even if it meant crossing lines of professional conduct. For Justin Baldoni, this testimony could be a significant turning point. It supports his argument that he was dealing with an increasingly aggressive counterpart, and that his actions were in response to escalating pressure, not instigation. It also helps counter the image of him that's been circulating in some corners of the media, that of an overbearing or controlling director. As the case progresses, we can expect Blake's team to push back hard against this interpretation. They'll likely argue that Greenberg and Zavala are biased, that they're protecting their agency relationships, and that the term extortion was exaggerated or misused.